Welcome to the Matt Crawford Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Crawford. Join me as we empower active duty military members with vital financial insights, guiding them towards financial freedom while serving on active duty. Episode 1, Maximizing Financial Freedom, Understanding the Thrift Savings Plan. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Super excited you're here. Even more excited to be talking to you today about the TSP. So in my opinion, the TSP is the foundation to wealth building for the active duty military member. And with it being the foundation, it's extremely important that we all know and understand what exactly the TSP is, what the options within the TSP, and how best to use the TSP for the entire career, however long that might be, 4 to 30 years, to set yourself up for wealth for your entire life. All right, so what is the TSP? The TSP is the federal government's version of a 401k. It's a defined contribution, so either the employer or the employee or both will contribute funds. The TSP was established back in 1986 by Congress, so it's about to be 37 years old. There's been some changes over the years, of course, just like any other government program. But some of the highlights of the TSP is that it's a tax-advantaged retirement saving. It offers low-cost investment options. So the expense ratios for the TSP range from 57 cents per $1,000 invested all the way to 90 cents per $1,000 invested, which comes out to equal 0.057 to 0.090%. So if you're investing $1,000 into a certain fund, you're only paying 57 cents a year for the TSP to manage that money. So of course, the more money you put in, the more you pay, but it's still the same percentage across the board. Just depends on how much you put in there. Another one of the advantages of the TSP is the employer matching contributions. Of course, that's if you're in the BRS system though. If you're not and you're in the High-3, it's all up to you. There is no matching contribution. So why is the TSP so important to a service member's financial planning? Well, when you enlist, usually the first thing you're going to invest in, maybe in your entire life, is going to be the TSP, especially now with the BRS system and the matching contributions. Service members should be investing as soon as they start. If it's 1%, all the way up to maxing out the contribution limit, this probably will be each service member's introduction to investing. And that just opens up the door into so many different avenues for investing. TSP really is the first one that a lot of service members will participate in. And with the low fees and the matching contribution and so many different funds that the service member can put their contribution into, it's really just a great opportunity to introduce all service members into the world of investing. So when that service member does invest in the TSP, what does that actually mean? Where are their funds going? If they just send their money off into some account, where does it go? So there are different funds within the TSP that a service member can put their funds into. They don't have to put it all into one fund. They can put a percentage in this, a percentage in that, and a percentage in a different one. They can put money in every single fund if they want to, or they can put it all into one fund. It's up to the service member and their risk-reward tolerance and what they are comfortable with. So looking at the individual funds, you have the G fund, which is the Government Securities Investment Fund. That's going to be your low risk, low reward. Talking maybe 3% gains per year, but you're not going to see negative, 30% that other funds might have. Then you got your F fund, which is the Fixed Income Index Investment Fund. So it's going to be a little bit more risky, a little bit more reward, but still pretty low compared to the G fund. Then you have the C fund. So the C fund is the Common Stock Index Investment Fund, looking at the large companies, U.S. companies. And then you have the S fund, Small Cap stock index investment fund. That's going to be your small companies, your small publicly traded companies. And then finally, you have the I fund, which is the International Stock Index Investment Fund. And that is the only fund that invests in international businesses, hence the I for international. So there are also life cycle funds, or L funds, and that will be for different years. And that's a targeted date to when you turn 59 and a half. So there's an L55, L60, L2065. That investment in those L funds will shift as time goes on from more risk, high reward, and then as you get closer to a retirement age, or that L65, L2065, as you get closer to 2065, that fund will shift its investments away from the high risk, high reward to lower risk, lower reward in an effort to maintain your funds that you've built up over the years. So instead of gains, you're looking at maintain. So of course, each fund is going to have different risk factors associated with it. The C fund is going to be the most high risk, high reward, with the G fund being a low risk, low reward. And again, it's really just up to you as the service member and what your return on investment or risk tolerance is. Of course, there's plenty of advice and suggestions on percentages and what ratios to invest in the different funds. So please do your research. But then when you make that decision, just remember it is purely on you and it is your decision. All right, so what's the difference between BRS and High-3? With the High-3, once you retire from the military, so after 20 years or 30 years if you had higher tenure, or 40 years if you're an officer, you will then receive 50% of your base pay in retirement. And it's not that last base pay that you got that day that you retired. It is the average base pay of your highest 3 years. So if you retire right at 20 years, they will take your base pay from year 17 to year 20, average those together, and then that is what your final base pay or your final retirement pay will be at 50%. So that is some of the calculation you have to take into account when you're planning for retirement. You're not going to get that highest base pay that you get right when you retire. You're actually going to get an average of your highest 3 years. So the new system, the BRS or the blended retirement system, it's a little bit different. Instead of getting 40 or 50% of that High-3 base pay, you will only get 40% of your base pay. But the big addition was a 12-year continuation pay, a lump sum, and there's different ratios depending on branch. So that's something that you would have to look at individually to see what you would get. And then also with the BRS, there is a matching contribution in the TSP. So in the High-3 system, TSP has nothing to do with it. You're completely on your own. If you invest in TSP, it's 100% on you, no matching. With the BRS, if you match or if you contribute, the government will match up to 5%. So if you put in your 5%, the government will give you a free another 5%. So in total, you would be investing 10%, but only 5% out of pocket. So you can see there's some similarities, but some big differences between the two systems. The High-3, you get that larger percentage, that 50% of your retirement pay, or of your retired base pay. But then the BRS, you only get 40%, but you get that continuation pay, and you get that 5% matching contribution. So if you do 20 years and you're at least 5% contributions each month, and the government is also doing the 5%, that could turn out to be a large amount of money difference, but it's entirely up to you and what works best. One of the reasons that the BRS was implemented, other than the obvious cost savings of bumping that base pay from 50% to 40%, with that matching like 5% government matching. It absolutely encourages service members to at least contribute 5%. What the government saw was a lot of members were separating or even retiring with having zero money put into the TSP. So if the government will match 5%, it will incentivize service members to also input 5%. So if they separate after 4 years or say 15 years, at least they have something with them to go to their next job, wherever that might be in the public, private sector. Roth versus traditional TSP contributions. So in the TSP, you can either put your funds into the Roth or traditional. So of course there's pros and cons to each of those. Again, it just depends on your personal situation and risk tolerance and plans for the future of what you're comfortable with. But the big differences between the two is that traditional is pre-tax contributions, whereas Roth is post-tax contributions. So because of traditional, if you contribute pre-tax, whenever you withdraw, once you hit 59.5, then you pay taxes on it. But on the other side, you have Roth, which is after tax. So you pay the taxes when you're in the military. And then when you're 59.5 and you're retired or you're working your second, third career, you don't pay any taxes on those withdrawals. So there are some factors that you should consider when you choose between the two. So generally, military members are in lower tax brackets than their civilian counterparts. And that's because of so many tax advantages that the military is offered. I'm looking at allowances. Allowances aren't taxed. So your BAS and BAH are not taxed. Whereas if you're in the civilian sector and you're getting any type of housing stipend or something like that, you're going to be paying taxes on that. So traditional, like I said, you pay taxes when you withdraw. So when you're 60 years old, if you have a C-suite level job or you're making $200,000-$300,000 a year because you got out and were crushing it, you're going to be in a much higher tax bracket. So it's generally better for the military member to invest in the Roth over the traditional, but of course everybody's different. Depending on your tax bracket, maybe your spouse makes a certain amount of money and maybe you're a high income earner between your job. It might be better for you to put into traditional. Again, it just depends on your goals. We talked about the TSP, when it started, what it is, the different options, a little bit of background and why it's so important for the service member to invest. Some of the expense ratios, talked about the funds, the C, S, and I fund. I'm a fan of those. You got your life cycle funds if you want something a little bit more set it and forget it. And then we talked about the difference between the BRS and the High-3. The High-3 being that 50% with no TSP, but then the BRS, you get 40% of your retirement base pay plus that TSP 5% matching, which if you contribute at least 5% throughout your career, that additional 5% could be an astronomical number. And then finally, we talked about the Roth and the traditional TSP, which ones generally work better for military members. But of course, there is no one size fits all for anybody. So if you're just getting into the military and you're wanting to at least make that 5% matching contribution, which I surely hope you are, hopefully this episode gives you a little bit more background on what the TSP is, what your options are, and you do some more research and make a plan for yourself and at least get that 5% matching. If you can hit that max contribution limit for the entire year, that's great. Hopefully this information helps you on your journey towards financial freedom. Thank you for tuning in to the Matt Crawford podcast. Remember, the knowledge gained here is just the beginning of your journey towards financial freedom. If you have questions or want to share your insights, please reach out to us. Until next time, stay focused, stay informed, and take action.